This morning, as John mentioned, we're going to be in part 3 of our series, From Rubble to Ruin. And if you haven't been here, I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary. If you have been here, a little bit of a recap of where we've been going. This series is actually a study in the book of Nehemiah, which is an Old Testament book about an Old Testament character. A really interesting story because it's incredibly relevant for us in our lives. I think it's incredibly challenging for us living in a culture like the one we live in today. Nehemiah was the guy who was the cupbearer to the king of Persia, which basically meant he gave the guy wine. Like he made sure that he was like a server in the king's palace. Really good job, really comfortable life. And Persia was very removed, or where he was very removed from what was happening in Jerusalem at the heart of what was going on with the nation of Israel. But Nehemiah was a man that was he grew up as a Jew. He was an Israelite, although he wasn't living in the land. What's significant about that is that during Nehemiah's lifetime, the people of Israel had been going back to Jerusalem after it had been ransacked by the Babylonians. They'd been rebuilding their city with the permission of the king of Persia and his grandchildren as they were leading successively. And the people of Israel were in the land rebuilding this life that God had initially promised them. So Nehemiah's story picks up when he hears a report that what's going on in Jerusalem looks nothing like the promise of renewal, the promise of flourishing that God has for his people. It actually is the opposite, that God's people are floundering. God's people are not at all living the kind of life that they were intended to live, that the city of Jerusalem is technically in ruins, that it's nowhere near what it could be. And what we've been talking about in this series is the same manner in which, or in the same manner, you and I have those kinds of experiences where we understand that God is doing something in the world that's amazing. He wants something beautiful for his people. Lives should be flourishing, and yet frequently, over and over again, we see that people, instead of flourishing, are floundering. And what's so challenging and beautiful about this story of Nehemiah is that he's showing us a way, showing us principles or a methodology for humanity to experience that renewal, that refreshing. The Hebrew word teshuvah is this word return that we've been looking at week after week, that we can experience this, but it's through a way that is very uncommon and very unfamiliar in the culture that we're living. In fact, this principle, what we're seeing, and this is incredibly timely, I think, in so many ways, what we're seeing is that in our culture today, our best life, like you and I firing on all 8 cylinders, you and I becoming all that we can be, to quote the Army or whatever, like you and I having the most amazing life, is not found in self-improvement, but it's found when we commit ourselves to serving and improving the lives of others. That our best life is found when you and I get passionate about something that's bigger than ourselves, something that's outside of ourselves, something that goes beyond our own comfort. That's what Nehemiah is showing us. And I think it's pretty poignant when you think about where we live today. I was reading an article this last week in Psychology Today, and it was an article about some of the psychological issues in our culture. And it was fascinating because as I was reading this article, there was a research study that was quoted, and this is what it said. Really interesting statement about where our culture has moved. These researchers had mapped out how many words or terms in print had drifted away from the usage of community-based words and more towards individually-based words. And this is what it said. That words like self and unique and I come first or I can do it myself have become more frequently printed, that over the last couple hundred years, those words are being used more than ever. And words like collective or share or sharing or banding together or common good are receding in usage. Not only that, along with this, they said that such words as virtue and conscience appear less frequently in printed media, while other words about self-betterment, self-strengthening arise more frequently. So over the last couple hundred years in our culture, the books and the magazines, everything that's being printed, our conversation is increasingly more about the self and the individual and less about the community, less about others. And so what we've been reading, what we've been hearing is this message of individualism. We talked in the first week that the self-help industry in America today is a $10 billion a year industry. $10 billion a year we spend on self-help. And by the way, this is not an idea, the selfishness or this idea that we're talking about in this series. It is not unique to everybody outside the church. There were 1,000 church attenders in a recent poll that were asked, why does the church exist? 89% of the respondents said that the church's purpose was to take care of my families and my spiritual needs. And only 11% said the purpose of the church is for impacting the lives of others. What's fascinating when you hear this is then you compare where we've moved to where we are as a culture, and you ask yourself questions about, are kids doing better today because we've gotten more focused on the individual? Are families thriving more today? Are mom and dad happier because it's more and more about the self and comfort? Like the trajectory of self-centeredness in our culture has gone up, but how has that affected our culture? Are we better off as people? Are we happier? Well, the answer is no. The answer is no. We're not happier, right? We actually are one of the most comfortable generations in history, and we're one of the most depressed generations in history. So why do we have this conflict? Why is this happening? Now, I think there's this tendency to go, wow, this is really fun. Glad I came to church today, to be told I'm selfish, right? Here's the other side of this. I think there's something beautiful and amazing about all the money we spend and all the effort we have on trying to improve ourselves. Because here's what I think is at the heart of it. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt the way I give myself the benefit of the doubt. I think that we have this sense inside of us that our lives should matter, right? Like the reason we spend time improving our situation, the reason we read the books, the reason we think we can be better is because we want our lives to make a difference, right? I mean, we all would love it if at the end of our life there was a receiving line and people were standing there waiting to thank us for the way that we impacted them. Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, hey, thanks, Brad, so much. Like getting into heaven, everyone's there. They're like, oh, yeah, well, thank you. Remember there was this time, you're like, yeah, I know. Like, that'd be awesome, right? Be so amazing. Like you and I, when we have those moments, those glimpses, when we've leveraged our life or our time or our resources and made a difference, those are the highlights for us, right? And so there's this part of us that knows there's this deep internal thing that says, I want my life to count. The problem is the methodology, how we get there, the journey, the path is what becomes so confusing in a culture that has so many messages about the self. I don't know about you, but during this series already, like my awareness has gone it's like heightened awareness of the self-centeredness of our culture. Anybody else noticing this since we started this series? Like you watch football or whatever, like if you don't fast forward through the commercials, like you watch the commercials, everything's focused on the self, right? Which is why Nehemiah is so incredibly powerful, because what Nehemiah is showing us, he's saying, I get it. We all want to make a difference. We all want our lives to matter, but the journey, the pathway towards that is radically different. So we've been looking at some questions, a series of questions, and answering these questions. The first week we looked at Nehemiah chapter 1, and we ended up asking ourselves this question: what breaks our heart? We saw that Nehemiah, his life speaks to us so powerfully because we have an individual who his heart is broken, but it isn't broken for his own situation and his own comfort. Nehemiah's heart is broken because he sees other people floundering. He knows that God has something different for them, and his heart breaks because they're not there. And so we ask the question, what breaks our heart? What breaks our heart? And I challenged you the first week to start thinking about this. Are there things in our life, are there places in our life where we are just kind of messed with, like where we're kind of sick about the brokenness in our culture, where we know things or hear things or see things and say, that's not the way it's supposed to be? And are we bothered by something other than just our own selves? And then last week, week number 2, we looked at chapter 2, and we saw that Nehemiah really shows us how to move from a place of having a broken heart to being somebody who does something about it. And we asked the question, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about this broken heart? We can't just sit around and all feel sad for culture and say, man, isn't this bad? But what Nehemiah shows us is that somebody who has their heart broken also begins to do something. They begin to challenge themselves and they get uncomfortable. And that's what we talked about last week. This idea that if you and I are going to begin this journey of becoming the people that we were created to be, it means that you and I are also going to have to accept a certain level of risk. And what we're going to be risking is our personal comfort. We're going to have to put our comfort and our desires and our pursuits on the line if we're going to become the people God created us to be. That's the question we asked last week, which leads us to a third question, and it's a question that I've been hearing all week long. I've had a dozen at least people come to me this week, and they go, okay, I get it. Like, you've made me feel horrible, all right? I feel selfish, you're right, like my heart's broken. No, I've only heard that from 1 or 2 people, but I have had a bunch of people come to me and say, man, I get it, I just don't know what to do. Like, what do I do now? Like, where do I start? which is the question that we're going to answer out of chapter 3 this morning. Where do you start? Once our heart's broken, once we decide we're going to do something, well, where do we do this? And I know for some of you, as we go through this today, I hope it's an encouragement. I hope that you go, man, I'm there. I've been there. I'm firing on all 8 cylinders in this capacity. For others of you, I hope this answers a very tangible thing for you. Where do you begin? Where do you start this thing? And what's really amazing about this the story in Nehemiah is that in every single chapter, there seems to be something tangible for us to take home. And let me just say this. Before we dive into chapter 3, which is what we're going to be in today, chapter 1 was week 1, chapter 2 was week 2, chapter 3 is week 3. Chapter 3 answers this question for us. Chapter 3 is about as exciting as a phone book. It reads like one. And by the way, some of you, I need to tell you, a phone book. It's this document that used to be delivered to your house and had all the names and numbers and addresses of the people that lived in your city, right? Isn't this amazing? We live in a world where you have to explain to people what a phone book is. But anyways, chapter 3 is about as exciting as a phone book. Like look up Williams in the phone book and just start reading. That's how chapter 3 can appear on the surface. When you start diving deeper, there's something beautiful embedded in this text. So if you'll just hang with me, I know for a moment you're going to be like, where is he going with this? If you'll just hang with me for a moment, I promise you there is something amazing in the middle of something that appears so boring, which is also really cool when we see something rise out of something in the scriptures that seems like it's kind of a bland, dry spot. But you're going to see something this morning that I think answers this question. So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to a chapter you've never read all the way through before in your life, even if you do like to read the Bible. And we're going to open up to Nehemiah chapter 3, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. And as we do this, I just back up the story just so you know it. Nehemiah, his heart was broken. He went to the king of Persia, said, I want to do something about this. The king of Persia gave him resources and permission. He goes to Jerusalem. Chapter 2, we saw last week. He surveys the condition of the wall of Jerusalem. The whole place is in disrepair. The reports were true. Stuff was broken. He casts a vision for the people, and they begin to do the work. And chapter 3 describes what happens, and it says this in verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it, set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zachar, the son of Imri, built. The son of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. So exciting, right? This is unbelievable. And then it just keeps getting better. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakaz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, repaired. And next to them, Zadok, the son of Baanah, repaired. And next to them, by the way, no one names their kids any of these names these days, right? I want a good, strong biblical name. Well, how about the Tekoites, right? So next to them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles wouldn't stoop to serve their Lord. Joada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Bosadiah, repaired the gate of Yeshanah. They laid its beams and set its doors and its bolts and its bars. And by the way, it just goes on like this, as you can see from the text behind me, and on and on. And there's a name, and there's a place where they were doing some work. There was a gate. There was a portion of the wall. There was something that they worked on. But then really, for real now, in verse 10, something happens. And there's a little point that comes up. And you could skim past this if you didn't read this. But in verse 10, it says this. And they're kind of going on. This person did this person. Then it says, next to them, Jediah, the son of Haramoth, repaired the opposite of his house. And next to him, Haddish, the son of Hashbaniah, repaired. And then it continues on, and there's more names. 15, 16, 17, 18. One name after another, one more section of the wall. Then you get down to verse 23, and you see something very similar to verse 10. It says this, after them, Benjamin and Hashub repaired opposite their house. And after them, Azariah, the son of Messiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. And then there's a few more verses with some names and some places on the wall. And then verse 28 says this, above the horse gate, the priests repaired, of course, because that's what priests do, each one opposite his own house. And catch this, you're going to see this here. After them, Zadok, the son of Imri, repaired opposite his own house. And after him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, repaired. And after him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanan, the sixth son of Zalap, repaired another section. And after him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, repaired opposite his chamber. Are you seeing a little bit of a pattern here? This chapter ends with a few more names, but I just want to give you a picture of this. This week I drew Jerusalem at the time of Nehemiah, and I'm just kidding, I didn't draw this. But we got this drawing of Jerusalem, and this really is the time of Nehemiah, kind of an artist's rendition of what we know is kind of being described. What we're reading in chapter 3 is this. You can kind of see, here's the wall of like the old city of Jerusalem, and what Nehemiah is doing is giving us like a step-by-step general contractor perspective of how the wall was being rebuilt. He was saying, well, here's the dung gate down here, and here's who was working on the dung gate, poor guys. And then like moving on and saying, okay, then there was this person and this person. And what we're reading in Nehemiah chapter 3 is all of the different portions of this wall of the city that were being rebuilt. So by the time we get to the end of chapter 3, we have all of this wall being mentioned in some capacity or another. And he's saying, basically, this is who was working in all of these different sections. And then this is what's really cool. This is what I love. And when I first saw this, I was like, I got to share this with somebody. Maybe I could preach on it. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just be done in like 15 minutes. But all of a sudden you realize there's this theme in verse 12 or verse 10 and then on in these other verses. You see that when he's describing where people were working, well, first of all, you notice that what's inside and around the walls of Jerusalem? Homes, right? So these people are working where they live. And then, for those certain number of people, the portion of the wall that they worked on was the part that was in front of their house. They worked on the part of the wall that was in front of their house. And maybe you don't think that's cool, but I think that's really amazing. And here's why. Because oftentimes, right, we get this sense of, man, I want to do something. I want to make a difference. Like, I heard a message at church, and we talked about this, or I heard a story of a person who leveraged their life, and man, I would love for my life to count for something. I would love for people to thank me that I was alive in their time of being on this planet. And yet at the same time, there's this pressure and this tension of, well, what do I do, right? Like, what do I do? Like, it's cool that I hear a great story about somebody in another country who started a clinic that turned into a hospital that solved a major medical problem in another third world nation. But what do I do? Like, I live in Spokane, Washington, and I got kids that are enrolled in school or what. Like, I think there's a pressure, is there not? And we wrestle with, okay, now what? I get it. My heart should break, and I know I should get my dukes up and do something about this, but what do I actually do? And the reason that I love this story, the reason that this story is so beautiful to me, is that if your heart breaks in that sort of way, what Nehemiah chapter 3 tells us is that this matters. Like, what's right in front of us actually matters. What's right in front of you counts. Like, this life that you have, what's right in front of you is significant. And here's why. And I think it's really important that you catch this. God is using, and God continues to use your circumstances to position you to accomplish His purposes in the world. He's positioned you. He's positioned you, which means you and I cannot underestimate the place that we find ourselves in. We have this tendency to go, well, who am I, right? Who am I to do anything about this? And yet what Nehemiah is showing us and what God has reminded us over and over again is that He uses our circumstances. He uses my story. He uses the details of my story, the commas and the periods and everything that have come together for His purposes. He does that with you. You are where you are for a reason. And your life matters. Your activity matters. The way you use your time and your energy, all of these things matter, and you can make a difference. You coming to that realization, you making that moment, or coming to that moment of saying, I can actually make a difference, I can do something about this, is what happened in the lives and the hearts of these people. Think about these people. When it says that they were working on the wall in front of their house, that means up until the moment in which Nehemiah showed up on the scene, these people who, by the way, mentions in Nehemiah 3, they made perfume, there were goldsmiths, there were people who were just working everyday jobs, people who maintained the temple. Every day they were getting up, they were kissing the kids goodbye at the door. giving their wife a kiss, grabbing their lunchbox, walking out, opening the picket fence, stepping outside, and there's the wall crumbled in front of their home, and they would go, man, somebody's got to do something about that. And then they would just walk to work, right? And every day they're coming back and they're going, oh man, somebody's got to solve that. And they would go back into their house. And it wasn't until Nehemiah came and looked at them and said, no, the somebody that's going to do something about that part of that wall is you, that they finally did. Every day. For 90 years, people were ignoring the rubble right in front of them because they thought, well, somebody else has to solve this. This thing's so big. What am I going to do? And yet the story of Scripture over and over again, the story of stories like Nehemiah is you can do what you can do. And it makes a difference. These people, they bound together. And if I would just do my part of the wall right here, and you'll do your part of the wall in front of your house, then the next neighbor does his thing, then pretty soon we're going to look out one day, and this thing's going to be done. But it takes you and me doing this. A couple of years ago, I moved houses. I moved onto a cul-de-sac off of 57th Avenue that probably most of you have been on at some point in your life. And here's why. At Christmas time, it glows like the Griswolds live there. So Sherry and I moved there. We moved into this neighborhood. We moved onto this street, and it suddenly became known to us that, this is just a thing that everybody does. You light up your house. You spend 3/4 of your annual income entertaining Spokane for 4 weeks and having them get stuck in front of your house in the snow. And so we moved into this house, and our neighbor right next door to us, they moved about the same moment. And my friend Iran, Mr. Watson, who used to teach at Lincoln Heights. So he lived next door, and he and I got out, we were hanging out one day, we're like, man, we got to do something about this. And so we just said, okay, let's bind together, man. We together, we pool our resources, maybe we can keep up with the Joneses. And so he and I, we went to the store separately, we bought a bunch of lights, and then we decided to meet in our front yard, which somehow he came out with some sort of Christmas vest on that weirded me out, but it was okay. So here's Ron standing out there with his Christmas hat and his Christmas vest. And then all of his lights, because he likes North Carolina, they were all white and blue. And I was like, seriously, man? I thought we were going to work as a team here. But we spent the next several hours, and we're just working. We're trying to keep up. And the neighbor across the street, he's like, do you guys need help? We needed help, okay? We needed help. We're like, no, we got this. And when Christmas finally came and everybody lit up their houses, yeah, it looked a little bit like Snoopy. But I spent more money than I'd ever spent before on Christmas lights. And I was so excited about this. This was the most amazing moment ever. Look at our house. And I never would have done it if it wasn't for my neighbors, right? Because you get your neighbors doing something next to you and you do it. That's the story of Nehemiah. I'm going to do what I can do. Except it's going to be a little more significant than Christmas lights. By the way, just a side note, we moved off that street. And my daughters are here, so I can tell them myself now. But this year, I didn't put any lights up, and they never even noticed. It was the best day ever, yes. Saved all kinds of money. They got presents instead this year. Dad, we don't have anything. Look at the lights. That's beautiful, right? There's this amazing thing that happens when suddenly you and I say, my life matters. I can actually do something. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do what's right in front of me. You're going to do what's right in front of you. Your circumstances, God put you where you are to see the brokenness that you see so that you can actually do something about it. So first of all, there's this awakening. There's this opening of the eyes that there is something right in front of you. Where do I start? I guess I start right here. And then there's this shift in the heart. There's this other thing that has to happen at some point or another. There was a custom in the day of Jesus that when somebody showed up at someone's house for dinner, they'd hired somebody who was very low in economic status, somebody who was the bottom of the rung socially. They would hire somebody to do the absolute worst job at any dinner party. In that age, in the time of the New Testament, when Jesus was teaching and establishing faith in God through him, when that was happening, people walked through the countryside, right, with sandals, and they had nasty, disgusting feet. And when you showed up at somebody's house for dinner, that made things really complicated because back in that day, people didn't sit at tables with their feet under the table. They sat at tables with their their feet alongside of them, reclining at a table. So when you had nasty feet, nobody wanted to sit next to you. And so the custom was started that they would hire some very poor, very desperate individual who would stand at the doorway, and when people came into the house, they would unbuckle their shoes and they would wash their filthy, nasty, grimy, sweaty feet, right? So that when they actually sat down at dinner, everybody was like, okay, this is good. We can do this. We can enjoy this. So Jesus, we read about this in the book of John, Jesus plans a dinner party. And whether it was some sort of administrative oversight on the part of Jesus or not, the disciples all show up to this dinner party, and there is no foot washer there. There's nobody there to wash their feet. And so here they're standing, and they come in the door, and there's this tension. In fact, the tension is very tangible and very real. And everybody's thinking, well, who's going to do this? Like, we can't go sit at the table with our feet like this. And you can almost hear like the internal dialogue that everybody's thinking, well, not me. I'm not the one that's going to do. Like, no, that's your job. Like, I've been a disciple like 4 months longer than you, and so I'm top of the rung, right? That's somebody else's job. I'm not the one that's going to do this. And so then this is what's crazy. When you read in the book of John, it says that at some point, while this tension is like thick in the room, the food gets served at the table. Which means that this went on so long that eventually the food gets served, and these guys made the decision, I would rather sit next to your nasty feet and eat my food than humble myself to wash them. And so these guys decide that we're going to gather around the table, we're going to sit here, and we're just going to ignore this thing. And so they sit down and dinner commences. The food's on the table, and we have skipped a very important part of just being clean, much less a custom that was in culture, right? So they begin to eat this meal, and they start to like begin the conversation, and I'm sure the tension's kind of starting to dissipate when all of a sudden the tension goes back in the other direction because Jesus, this is what the book of John says. It says that Jesus in that moment, as they're sitting around the table, Jesus takes off his outer robe, and the picture is unbelievable because as they're reclining, you think about this, they're reclining around the table. Jesus gets the bowl of water and the basin and the jug, and he begins to just wash the disciples' feet while they're now sitting there at the table. Like there was like dinner time chat, and now he's washing their feet. Their filthy feet. And then Jesus, the picture is that he's basically just sliding the basin and this jug of water across the floor and coming to each one of them, and he's washing their feet, and he moves around the table. I'm sure like back then they actually did sit around the table, by the way, not like the pictures where they're all on one side of the table. Hey, I agree with that one. But he goes around the table like this, right? And he's on, and you just this image of Jesus, their Lord and Savior, crawling around the table, washing their nasty feet. And then John says that at the end of coming around all the disciples, he's got this basin that's just muddy and gross and grimy and filthy. And John says this. John says in verse 12 of John 13, he looks at his disciples, who, by the way, at this point, the chatter had to have stopped, right? They're just like, you should have done it. You should have washed the feet. He shouldn't be doing this, right? Like they're all just like, oh, this is so awkward, so uncomfortable. But then in verse 12, Jesus says this, beautiful. Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do, just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So Jesus looks at his disciples, and in this moment, he unapologetically, with no ambiguity, he says, whoever calls themselves a disciple, whoever says that they're a follower of me, performs acts of kindness and servanthood like foot washing, like the filthiest of tasks, like the most mundane of things. He says, I want the distinctive characteristic. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, the thing I want people to know about those that bear my name is that they serve in the very tangible, practical ways that I've just shown you. I want them to be identified. Out of all the people that live in the world, I want people to look and go, those are the ones that just jump in. Those are the ones that walk out of their house and they see the mess in front of them and they do something about it. He says, I'm asking for my followers to live beyond themselves, to look beyond their own concerns, to look beyond their own safety, their own comfort, their own needs. I want those people that follow me to want something besides something for themselves. I want them to desire something other than something just for themselves. That's what he calls them to. I want all of my followers to get down on their knees and get the towel over their arm and to get the basin and to be willing to wash the feet of those that are around them. That's what happens in the heart of a person who begins to do something with the brokenness that's right in front of him. Right in front of your house. Right in front of your grill, however you want to say it. Right in front of your world. Right in front of your everyday life. There's brokenness. There are opportunities where you can serve. There are things that you can do. But not only do you have to see them, but you have to have the willing heart to say, I will do whatever it takes to carry the name of Jesus appropriately. So the question that this is asking us is, what's right in front of you? What's right in front of you? What is smack right in front of you? What do you see in your world? What do you, this morning, John asks for servers for the adoption foster care dinner. It's right in front of you. Every week there are opportunities to volunteer around Summit. Right in front of you, right? There are things that happen. I heard stories yesterday. I don't know how many of you went to put the kits together for Bite to Go, one of our affiliates, but I heard stories yesterday of folks that gathered together at Second Harvest to put kits together. I mean, guys that work in business and, super educated, really gifted people who are down there just racing, trying to beat the other team, building boxes to feed kids, but it was just an opportunity that was right in front of them, and they took it. What's right in front of you? What are you doing? What is the broken down wall in front of your house, and what are you doing about it? See, you don't have to go somewhere. You don't have to buy a plane ticket. You don't have to raise money. You don't have to announce it on Facebook. All you have to do is get the heart of a servant like Jesus, who looked at every single one of us and said, do you want to know life? You want to really find life? Get over yourself and start washing people's feet. Make your life about another person's life and watch what happens. So what's in front of you? That's where you start. Do you know what happens when you do this with your work? When you look at your work and you go, you know what, my work is right in front of you. What would happen if you looked at your job and instead of walking in every day with a chip on your shoulder, with a sense of entitlement, what if instead of walking in thinking, man, here we go, I just got to punch the clock and get out of here and avoid any comp, what if somehow you walked into your job every day and instead of seeing all the things you deserved, you started seeing all the ways that you could serve the people that you work with? What if that was it? What if that's the brokenness? What if you just said, you know what? I'm not going to be a part of the mess anymore. I'm not going to contribute to the gossip or the water cooler talk. I'm just going to come in every day, and when I see that somebody needs something, whether it's the smallest thing, just giving a hand and picking something up, or whether it's something significant like sitting down and sharing your heart with somebody, I'm going to be there to encourage other people. Can you imagine the transformation that would take place in your work if you started seeing your work as the wall that's in front of your house? What about your family? I know sometimes I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I look at my house as a refuge, right? And we've tried to build a culture in my home where we say, this is the one place where you can be on your worst behavior. We want you on your best behavior out there, but you can be on your worst behavior here. And I think sometimes that's healthy to have a home where you just kind of be yourself. But at the same time, do I come into my house and do you come into your house looking to get something from the people that I live and do life with? Or am I looking to serve them? You know how radically things change when my perspective with my own family, with my own kids and my own wife, you know how much my world transforms when it's no longer about what I'm getting from you or whether or not you're reciprocating the way I want you to, and it becomes about me actually doing something just to serve? It changes things. Somebody was shocked this week, but you want to know a big development in my life lately? I've been doing the dishes. Me. And I'll tell you, we have an injustice in our house regarding dishes. There is a broken down wall because we have a sink that is full of dishes. And right next to it, we have a dishwasher that works perfectly. And somehow the dishes that are in the sink cannot get from the sink to the dishwasher. So you know what I've been doing for like the past 9 years of my life? Ranting. My neighbors will tell you, right? I rant, like, what is wrong with you people? It's right here. I've had like instructional times. Come on, everybody gather around. This is how you do it. You turn the water on, you rinse it, you open it, you put it here, you close it, and you're gone, right? Somehow they can't get this. And now all of a sudden something changed in my world, my heart this week, when I just went, what's your deal? Like the time I spend ranting about the dishes, I could probably get the dishes done. Sometimes I put a little music on, makes it even more fun. And I'm just like, I'm just going to serve, just going to put the dishes away. Imagine what happens if in every category of your home you started saying, what can I do to heal the brokenness? Your friendships, the places where you recreate, the gym that you work out in. Are we just there taking? Are we consumers sucking everything and everyone dry around us? Or are we building the wall? Because this wall won't build itself. So what's in front of your house? What are you doing to make a difference in the brokenness in your world? Here's the deal. All I can do is challenge you. Whatever you're going to do is a conversation between you and God. But I'm going to challenge you. And today I'm going to challenge you with two very practical things. I'm going to challenge you with these two things. First, this. Before you leave here today, I want you to try to serve somebody practically. Because I think the way that we start figuring this out on a big level, the way that we really start putting the bricks together to build a wall, is that you and I start doing the small things that break the habits of selfishness in our heart. So I'm going to challenge you. Before you leave this property today, I'm going to challenge you. Would you serve somebody? Figure something out. Maybe it's that you go out and sign up for something. That's not why I'm preaching this message. Because maybe it's just that you hold the door for somebody on your way out. I just want you to find the posture of your Savior on his hands and knees, washing his disciples' feet. I just want to challenge you. Do something. I don't even care. And there's probably going to be a log jam this morning at the front door. Right? You guys are all going to be leaving. No, after you. No, after you. No, after you. No, after you. Don't rob me of my opportunity to serve. No, don't rob me, right? So then if you're really smart, you'll go, I'm going to serve you by letting you serve me, right? You do that one. I've been playing that card for years. Let me serve you by you serving me. But truly, like just before you leave today, if there's something you can do, if there's something you want to jump into, whatever, but I'm just going to say, start taking the small steps, and then I'm going to challenge this. Do it again. Do it twice today. Find some other place today. Some of you guys, do the dishes. Quit ranting about it, right? Do something to serve the people around you. Take the challenge, because this wall that's in front of you starts when you and I begin to have the heart of a servant. And we begin to act on what that heart tells us to do. Amen? Amen. Would you stand with me? Lord, I truly believe that the restoration that you want in our hearts, the wholeness that you're trying to create in our lives, comes when we begin to follow you in a practical life of sacrifice and service. And as challenging as this is, as countercultural as this is, Lord, I pray that these words, your words, would sink deeply into our hearts. And that not only would we see the city around us, the culture around us, begin to move from a place of desolation to a place of wholeness, but would we see our own lives begin that same journey? Would it be possible, Lord, that we would be the kind of people who become who you want us to be because we chose to serve others the way that you serve others? We love you, Jesus. Thank you for your amazing example to us, the wholeness that you promise us. We love you, and we pray this in your name. Amen.